I'm not nervous at all. Wow. This is a presentation of what became my master's thesis, and it is called this. It's a tiny bit longer as a title, but I had to make it shorter. It's intentionally designing a game to help alleviate symptoms of depression. And a lot of the inspiration from this came, well, from stats from WHO, or the World Health Organization. And basically, I found out that depression is a really, really common condition. And not only that, but there is a severe lack of treatment resources where a lot of people don't get the help that they need. And it's at least 75% of the people don't get the help that they need. And a lot of that comes down to lack of resources, the resources available being super expensive. But then also, this is my main inspiration here. It's often a taboo topic. And even where I come from, it's a taboo topic to talk about in public as well as in family environments. And but apart from that, games have been used often as a way of escapism, and they have been shown to have a positive effect on people. And the gaming industry is a growing industry, so it might have been worth exploring it as a way of helping alleviate the symptoms of depression. Games are very widespread and quite accessible, with a lot of them, being cheap or even free. And obviously, they're way cheaper than some therapeutic methods, non-public health accessible ones. And they provide us an interesting chance or opportunity to practice a different way of thinking or acting. And they are an opportunity to learn. And the challenges with games are plenty. And when I was looking into games as a way of helping people suffering from mental health, the first thing that I came across was representation of mental health in video games. And it is the first challenge, I believe, because it is a gateway towards a block of empathy. If this representation is not done properly, it can be detrimental to the people who are represented in these games. And I believe that if proper representation of these people's experiences is done in video games, it may enable self-identification with the events of the video games. And it might also enable bleed. And thanks to Shell for providing me the necessary language to mention what types of bleed I'm talking about. Those are procedural bleed, where, well, correct me if I'm wrong, these people will learn the habits that are depicted in the video games may bleed into their real lives. Emotional bleed, which is the most direct, pointer towards helping these people, and mimetic bleed, which is thoughts, and basically introducing that new frame of thinking and healthier frame of thinking. But as a side effect of that, where proper representation in video games might also improve social stigma around mental health, and that whole taboo topic may become less taboo. So in order to do my research, I looked into video games, how commercial video games have depicted depression, anxiety, and mental health in general before. And it's often poorly represented. Like horror games, for example, are a bad example of this. Take Outlast, the first game. There have been studies that directly connect movie depictions of mental health with video game depictions, and we're talking about horror asylums here, or electroshock therapy as a torture method. Or there are also those AAA titles like Cyberpunk 2077, which might have had good intentions, but the way that they handle mental health is quite poor. But then it's not all bad news, because there's also the good representations in the form of Greece, which represents grief and the stages of grief, Celeste, which represents anxiety and depression, and even Hellblade, which is a game that was designed in cooperation with mental health professionals and people who suffered from psychosis. But more often than not, Hellblade here being edge case, more often than not, this design is intuitive and it's not well researched, and it's mostly representing the experience of the designers themselves. And in order for me to make it a well-researched design, I looked into this theoretical background, which is a small part of what I read, because I, as Maud Lebowski would put it, I wanted to be a good man and thorough, but this is what it boiled down to. And I looked into LARPs quite a bit because I think they're a really big source of inspiration, because a lot of research is being done in LARPs and how to practice change and how to induce empathy. And a lot of those design principles that are used in LARPs can also be used in video games, and with varying degrees. I also looked into Goffman performance, and he mentions how it is impossible for a performer to extract themselves completely from the role, and also it is possible for a performer to learn from the performance. And in this case, the performer would be the player. And also, as I mentioned before, bleed in and bleed out. And these two terms are mainly, bleeding in means your person, your character, yourself, you put yourself into the game and express yourself through the game, but also a lot of the things that you notice in the game might show themselves in real life, post-play. Going to these two games, these were my chosen games for an analysis and my source of inspiration. Celeste, because, well, it is commonly known as a good or one of the better representations of mental health. And it's largely based on Maddie's personal experience, which is the creator. And she put her own experience into this game. And Hellblade, for the reasons that I mentioned before, it's well researched, and professionals in the field have been included into the design of the game. And it's also well documented. The intentions of the designers are also well documented. And what I found is that no representation can be 100% accurate to everybody's experience. And that is important to say in any case, because even when you're designing a game, a part of your own experience is incorporated into the game, and it's not going to be 100% accurate. But what is important is that it is a respectful depiction, and it's respectful towards the people that are being represented and respectful towards their experiences. In addition to that, both of these games do an attempt to challenge stereotypes, as these people, for example, suffering from mental health, being weak, or I don't know, the psycho killer trope, for example. They try to separate the psychosis from the psycho killer trope that was built by American Psycho. They're also inclusive design. They always include a person's experience in the design. As I said, it was Maddie's experience on one hand, and also people who suffer from psychosis, as well as the professionals in Hellblade's case. They try to be impactful or empathetic. They try to create an aura of empathy and welcoming and positive, a positive aura around the games. And they also try to promote positive behavior, mainly help-seeking, opening up, self-acceptance, and accepting one's situation. And those are some of the lessons that I try to incorporate into my game, which is Break It. And this game was sprouted from a really interesting conversation with one of the original designers that we worked on, Sophie. She had this idea of a mechanic of interacting with an object, and suddenly color appears all around that object. And then together we worked on it, incorporating our own experiences. And we used it as a metaphor towards how the world might seem to a person that is suffering from depression. It often looks gray and bland, and not interesting. But if you interact with objects, this game is designed is intending to help them break these habits and do things out of their routines, which you often fall into when you're depressed. And if you interact with objects, if you interact with an instrument, if you interact with people, this game rewards you with colors all around the world, and up until that point where the whole world is bright and colorful. And based on the lessons I learned from the analysis, I tried to incorporate a lot of these elements into this game. And a lot of them were being able to self-identify with the character that is in the game. The character from the first moment was designed to be representative of everybody, or rather not look like anybody. It doesn't have a gender, it doesn't have a race, it doesn't have any religious pointers. Instead, the character is just something that you can put yourself into the shoes of. And that also, I tried to add a bit onto it with character customization. And we're not talking about big things here, maybe just changing t-shirts or maybe putting a name on the character, just so that the player is incentivized to identify with the character. Also, the world is designed to have a lot of interactions into it, and interactions that can each and every one of you here can find themselves into. One of the interactions that I introduced, for example, was hitting a singing bowl, for example, which is something that I found out to be super helpful for me in my dark days, and sort of breathing in, and box breathing or square breathing. But just like the singing bowl or incense burning, which I did a lot of, there are a lot of other interactions that we're planning to include into the game, such as playing an instrument or drawing, or just sitting in a park and taking in the nature, or bird watching and things like that, that each and every one has done at some point, or a hobby that each and every one does, and they can be shown that this can be used to help you relax and help you take a moment. And there was a bunch of other mechanics that I wanted to introduce into it. There's a long list that you can read about in my paper, but a lot of them had to be scrapped. Even though I thought they were great ideas, they had to be scrapped because at the end of the day, they might not fit the overall design of the game. And then also some decisions were just scrapped because in the moment I thought, oh, this is such a great idea. Like, for example, being unable to understand different characters when they were talking to you. And I thought it was a brilliant idea because often sometimes you may not be interested in you hear other people speaking, but you don't understand them because you got so much in your head. But then on a second look, I thought it might also be interpreted as something negative, as in people with depression, they're not interested in anybody else. They don't pay attention to anybody else. And that's why I had to scrap that mechanic. And, it's always like as I said, it cannot ever be 100% accurate to everybody. So there needs to be a compromise at some point, right? But if it was that obvious to me, it might have been that obvious to somebody else. So a lot of these mechanics had to be scrapped. And apparently I actually skipped right through this slide, so I am going to skip it. But the next steps and next plans, that first word right there, which is bolded, is something that I heard everybody speak about. And it's fascinating to me because even the material that I read suggested that it can be really, really beneficial to converting those in-game learned lessons into real life and consolidating bleed. But unfortunately, in video games, it's not explored almost at all. There are hints of people trying to do it, but it's never done properly, or it's mostly just done because, oh, this is so cool, and people will think this is actually really cool. And one example that I always take here is the hostess in Detroit Become Human. In the end of the game, you're asked whether you want, and spoiler alerts here, I'm sorry to anybody, but in the end of the game, she asks you whether she can be free to leave. And she always comments on events that happen within the game once you reach the menu or once you exit to the menu. But it's never done as something that is like helping you reflect on the events that happen and unfold into the game. Instead, it's just done as something like, oh, there is interaction in the main menu. That is so cool, something that I've never seen before. And I would like to explore that because debriefing always happens, but it's mostly informal. Often when people are moved by a video game, they go into forums and they share their experience, and a lot of people communicate together and share their own experiences. And this is informal. But I believe that a more formal type of debriefing, where you are guiding the player towards consolidating these lessons, can be really beneficial in a video game concept. And also the other things, color theory, obviously, because color is the main mechanic of the game, sound design, because sound is really important in video games and setting a theme, and also symbolism, which is a really tricky thing to handle. And yeah, that was my time. So I thank you everybody for being here.